Welcome to this explainer. Now, I want you to imagine, just for a second, that the sterile, everyday digits humming away inside your spreadsheets or your bank accounts actually possess a lineage that is far older and, frankly, far more mysterious than you probably ever suspected. Today, we're taking a deep, shadowy dive into the esoteric foundations of mathematics, astrology, and numerology. We're going to peel back the layers of history to reveal how the language of pure logic was actually, at its very inception, the language of the divine.
It all begins with a rather profound realization, beautifully summed up by the Greek biographer Plutarch. He wrote, "Plato said, God geometricizes continually." Think about that for a moment. The mathematics that you and I learned in some brightly lit modern classroom, well, it was originally conceived by our ancestors as a highly secret, sacred code. It was quite literally a method to communicate with the architect of the cosmos. To the ancients, you see, numbers didn't just measure quantities. No, they represented universal living principles. They were the actual fabric of creation, a divine blueprint governing absolutely everything, from planetary orbits right down to the fate of a single human soul.
To truly wrap our heads around this, we actually need to travel way back to the starlight of Babylon, around the 5th century BC. In this ancient cradle of civilization, the rigorous study we now just call mathematics was known as Babylonian numbers, and it was completely intertwined with something called arithmancy, which is the study of divination through numbers. You see, Babylonian priests didn't view astronomy and math as secular, separate sciences like we do. Instead, they believed that the gods, especially the god E, were actively communicating future events through celestial omens. So, to decipher the will of the gods, you had to meticulously calculate the movements of the heavens. It was a matter of cosmic translation.
And what you get here is this perfect, fascinating duality. Babylonian priests developed this incredibly sophisticated mathematical system. They divided the 360-degree sky into exact 30-degree segments, which, by the way, gave us the 12 signs of the zodiac. Now, on one hand, this astronomical rigor was highly practical, right? It let them create accurate calendars to regulate vital crop cycles. But simultaneously, that exact same mathematical precision was used for the divine. They used it to read celestial omens and predict the rise and fall of entire empires. Eclipses, which they could calculate with stunning numerical accuracy, well, they weren't just shadows. They were viewed as dire, urgent warnings sent straight from the divine realm.
So, moving from the starlit observatories of Babylon down into the sun-baked dust of ancient Egypt, we encounter a totally different yet equally fascinating group. They were known as the Harpedonectai, or simply the rope stretchers. Now, these were skilled workers whose sacred rope-stretching rituals laid the actual empirical groundwork for what we'd eventually call Euclidean geometry. Here's the setup. Every single year, the Nile River would flood, completely washing away all the agricultural field demarcations. The rope stretchers were called in to restore physical order from this watery chaos, remeasuring property lines for taxation and farming. But, and this is key, their work wasn't just administrative. It was a heavily ritualized act, often involving the pharaoh and the goddess Seshat. They were literally aligning human endeavors with cosmic order.
Now the real magic, the true power of this practice, came down to one very specific number: 13. The rope stretchers you see didn't just grab any old piece of twine. They used these specially prepared cords, heavily treated with beeswax and resin so they wouldn't stretch or sag in that brutal Egyptian heat. And these cords were tied with precisely 13 knots, all spaced at perfectly regular intervals called royal cubits. Having exactly 13 knots allowed them to manipulate this rope into fundamental geometric shapes. They essentially turned a basic agricultural tool into an absolute powerhouse of mathematical precision.
Through a series of really practical, physical steps, these ancient surveyors achieved something mind-blowing. By taking that 13-knotted rope and pegging it into the mud to form sides of 3, 4, and 5 units, they invariably perfectly created a right angle. Every single time. This is the practical application of proportional geometry, long before Pythagoras ever sat down to theoretically prove his famous theorem. And the exact same right triangle used to remeasure a muddy onion patch after a flood, well, it was the very same mathematical tool to meticulously align the Great Pyramid of Giza to the exact cardinal directions. Talk about an awe-inspiring mastery of mathematical space.
So it's absolutely crucial to remember that the word geometry itself literally translates to earth measurement. Ge meaning earth and metron meaning measure. This was a science born straight out of the dirt, a desperate earthly need to restore order after a catastrophic flood. Yet the empirical, hard-won truths discovered in the mud of the Nile Valley eventually reached the great classical thinkers. Greek philosophers like Pythagoras actually traveled to Egypt and studied these exact methods for decades. They looked at these rules of earthly proportion and realized, wait a minute, this is hinting at a much deeper, universal truth.
When Pythagoras returned from his esoteric studies, he didn't just teach math. He elevated these earthly measurements into a full-blown spiritual philosophy. He saw number as a universal, living reality. It wasn't just some tool for counting grain. In his school, the foundation of all arts and sciences was this holy trinity of occult mathematics, music, and astronomy. In fact, the very Greek root for mathematics, ma, translates directly to mother wisdom. And originally, the term mathesis was the exact word they used for astrology. For them, to study math was, quite literally, to study the mind of God.
Within this deeply philosophical framework, numbers weren't just abstract concepts. They were imbued with distinct characteristics, frequencies, and even moral weight. For ancient mathematicians, certain numbers were the embodiment of pure perfection. Take the number 73, for instance. In the ancient practice of gematria, where letters actually correspond to numerical values, the Greek words for perfect and number both add up to an ordinal value of exactly 73. It's a number that symbolizes divine light and ultimate completion. And to those who study these esoteric patterns, it is absolutely no coincidence that there are exactly 73 books in the Catholic Bible. To the initiated mind, the mathematics of the universe aren't random. They're deliberately encoded.
But this pursuit of the divine through mathematics, it definitely didn't die out with antiquity. The idea spread and found new, vibrant life centuries later in the shadowy, opulent courts of 16th century Renaissance England. We see this brilliantly encapsulated in the esoteric harmonics explored by Dr. John Dee, the famous royal astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I. Dee was on a quest to reach far beyond the physical realm, desperately searching for the pure, universal language of creation that he believed humanity had lost.
You have to understand, Dee operated in this incredibly fascinating era where the line between rigorous science and ceremonial magic was basically non-existent. The man was a brilliant mathematician. He even wrote the preface to the first English translation of Euclid's geometry. But at the same time, he published the Monas Hieroglyphica, a complex esoteric symbol he personally invented to map out alchemical and astrological transformations. Dee firmly, genuinely believed that advanced geometry, mathematics, and alchemy weren't just secular hobbies. They were the literal keys required to unlock direct communication with angelic intelligences. Driven by this absolute conviction, Dee teamed up with a medium named Edward Kelly, who would gaze into an Aztec obsidian mirror to receive visions. Together, they meticulously recorded what we now call the Enochian magical system. And the core of this system? It was terrifyingly mathematical. It revolved almost entirely around the number 49. Kelly claimed the angels dictated 94 immense matrices or tables to them. Each of these grids contained exactly 49 by 49 letters, and from these massive grids, they systematically, mathematically derived the names of 49 angels of light. To John Dee, this was not some parlor trick or superstition. This was a supreme, mathematical technology designed to map the entire spiritual hierarchy of the universe. So we've journeyed from Babylonian star priests reading eclipses to Egyptian rope stretchers in the mud, all the way to Renaissance magicians charting literal angelic grids. Yet the profound mathematical tools of antiquity actually survive today in delightfully unexpected and sometimes beautifully profane ways. Take this wry, famous quote from football manager Bill Shankly. He said, "Some people believe football is a matter of life and death. I can assure you it is much, much more important than that. It perfectly highlights how we humans still desperately seek divine certainty in the events we care about most, and it transitions us seamlessly from summoning heavenly hosts to the modern, muddy battleground of the football pitch."
Believe it or not, the very same astrological mathematics once used by ancient kings to determine the fates of entire empires is actively being applied today. It's called horary astrology, and contemporary astrologers like John Frawley use its rigorous traditional principles to predict modern sporting events. So instead of asking if a neighboring kingdom will fall, modern clients are asking if Arsenal will win the league. And the mathematical mechanics used to figure that out, tracking planetary dignities, calculating angles, charting house rulerships, they remain startlingly similar to the exact methods practiced by the ancients thousands of years ago. When predicting a contest, Frawley follows this highly systematic, almost ritualistic process. Honestly, it's not unlike the ancient Egyptian rope stretchers laying out those 13 knots. First, a chart is cast for the exact moment and location the question is understood. Then, the astrologer applies what's called the we chest. They assign the first house to the team the client identifies with, and the seventh house, which is traditionally the house of open enemies, to the opposing team. By judging the strict mathematical angles and planetary receptions between the rulers of these houses, modern sports astrologers draw immediate, decisive judgments directly from the stars. It's strict, it's empirical, and it is entirely based on the geometry of the heavens.
And that brings us to a really profound crossroad, and ultimately the core question of our explainer today. We've traced the incredible lineage of mathematics, from its birth as a divine mechanism of prophecy, all the way to its ubiquitous, invisible presence in our modern daily lives. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this to ponder. Are the numbers operating inside your spreadsheets, your algorithms, and your city's architecture truly just sterile, soulless tools? Or, when we measure our world, predict our sports, and build our modern societies, are we still, unwittingly, tracing the geometry of the divine?